Hi guys, this video is going to be a reteach video on place value, rounding, and expressing money. You need to go to the next available page in your composition notebooks and write this title at the top of that composition notebook, the entire thing, including the part where it says reteach video. Now remember, throughout this video it is a reteach, so you will need to pause and in order to be able to write down the examples, because I'm going to go through not quickly, but maybe a little bit faster than I normally would in a regular lesson, but there's just a lot of information to cover. So we're going to begin with place value. So go ahead and write place value on the side of your paper, and then when you're ready, go ahead and push play again on your video. So we're going to start with the number 572 and 41/100ths. So what's important to know about place value is you need to know the position that each of these numbers is in, and you need to also know their value as well. So for example, for those of you that like to play baseball, if you look at this example here, you know that the person that is in this position over here that I just circled is in the catcher spot. You know that the person that's going to be standing over here is your shortstop or your right fielder back in the back right of the field when you're looking at it from the pitcher's, from the catcher's point of view. So each of these spots or each of these positions on a baseball field have a position, and that's where they kind of have to stand for their position, and they each have their own job to do when the game is in play. The same thing with soccer. You've got your goalies, so you've got the one goalie on the right and the one goalie on the left. You've got your midfielders, so these guys are your centers, your center people. This is your, midfielders on the right side or the left side, however that works. And by the way, I claim to not be an expert at any of this, but at least I know that when I look at the field, I can figure out, which player is playing what position. As long as they don't move around too much, then I can figure out who the forwards are, who the defenders are, and so forth, because it's just something that I've studied and gotten to know. So this is what you have to do with your numbers as well. And yep, I've got a football example as well. So when you're looking at this, obviously the team in red has the ball, so you know where the quarterback stands. So it's one of those things where, depending on their line formation, you kind of know like what that person's position is supposed to be in that game. We want to think of the same stuff when we're doing numbers. So when we're looking at our 572, so what I want us to focus on first is just the number up to the decimal point. So 572, the way that you would read that number is exactly what I said, 572. The 5 is worth 500 because remember I said 572. The 7 is worth a 70 because the number is 570 and then 2, and the 2 is just worth a 2. Now the 41, the point 41, these numbers right over here come after our decimal point. So what that means is they're less than 1. They're not enough to be one whole number to be on the other side of our decimal. So they're not big enough to be on that side. They're too small to be in front of the decimal point. So they're behind the decimal point. Sometimes it helps to think of these numbers kind of like money, especially if you only have 2 spots after it. So now the 4, so it's important, remember what we said, it's important to know our positions here. And I think a lot of you know your numbers in front of the decimal point, but you struggle with your numbers after or behind the decimal point. So the 4 is in the tenths column. So notice that it ends with a THS. This is not to be mistaken with the word 10, because the 7 is in the tens column. So the 7's in the tens, but the 4 is in the tenths with a THS at the end. The 1 is in the hundredths column. Once again, there's your THS. So any number that comes after a decimal point will have that THS afterwards, or after the word. Or at the end of the word, I should say, rather. Now, we could have another number attached to this, so maybe I want to add the number 3. That 3 would then be in the thousandths column with a THS at the end of that word. So you guys, this is really important for you to memorize and learn. Now I have a chart in the classroom that I can give you, so if you need one so that you're not drawing it out, please ask me for one, and I have it ready to go on my desk for you, for those of you that need a new one, because we do have this drawn out on our original notes as well. But this is something where you have to memorize and learn the position of these numbers and their values, but especially the positions, because when you take the rounding quiz, it's not going to sit there and say, hey, round it to this spot, and it's not going to have it underlined for you. It's going to basically say round it to the nearest tenth or round it to the nearest thousand, and you have to be able to figure out where that position is, just like you know where your position is when you guys are out there playing sports, for those of you that do play sports. So we're going to go ahead and move into rounding whole numbers first. So whole numbers are exactly what they are. They're whole numbers. They don't have any little parts that don't belong, like the change part or the numbers that come after a decimal point. So these numbers are not going to have any decimals for these first few that I'm going to give you. So now the first number I'm going to give you, and I want you to copy this part down, is 1,765, and what I want you to do is round it to the nearest 10 spot. So you need to know which spot that 10 spot is in. All right, you guys. So the 10 spot is where the 6 is. So here's my 6. That's in my 10 spot. So I want you to draw that back door. If you remember from the original video, and if you can't recall, watch that original video. It's like a 4 or 5 minute video. It talks about who's knocking on my door, 5 or more, raise a score, 4 or less, let it rest. So you want to draw your back door. So I just drew my back door, because I want to round it to the 6 spot. I'm drawing my back door, so now I know who's knocking on my door. The person who's knocking on my door is a 5. So remember the saying, 5 or more, raise a score, 4 or less, let it rest. So since the 5 is 5 or more, that means my 6, that's the number that I have underlined, is not going to stay a 6. It's going to go up to be a 7. So what I'm doing now is directly underneath my problem here, and this might help some of you, is to just write it right underneath. Since it's a whole number, we need to have a spot for every single digit that you see here. The 1 stays the same. The first 7 stays the same. Remember, we said we're going to round the 6 to a 7, and then this 5 basically becomes a 0. Just pay attention to the original number that you had. You had a number 1,765. When you're rounding your number, you want to make sure you're rounding the number so it's still close to the original number, because some of you would sit there and round this to 170 or 177, and that's not even close to 1,770. So make sure that you are doing that. All right, let's try another problem here to the right. So this one I would like for you to write down. We're going to do 3,492. And this one I would like for you to round to the nearest 1,000. So the 1,000 is this number right here. I'm drawing my back door. So 5 or more, raise a score. So now I'm looking at the 4. 5 or more, raise a score, 4 or less, let it rest. That means I let it rest. I'm not changing anything. So the 3 stays a 3. Now, all these numbers that come after my back door, they're in line waiting. They just turn into zeros. So your 3,492 turned into a 3,000. All right, so I want to take the same number again. So rewrite 3,492. This time, I want us to round it to the nearest 100. So the number that's in the 100 spot is the 4. So draw your back door after it. Who's the first guy knocking on the door? It's the 9, right there. Okay, 5 or more, raise a score, 4 or less, let it rest. Well, 9's a pretty big number, so that means the 4 is going to become a 5. We're raising that 4 up 1 spot. So my 3,492 becomes a 3,000, the 3 stays. The 4 becomes a 5. Now you see these two numbers right over here? They turn into zeros. Now the reason why they turn into zeros and we're not dropping them off is because they are my whole numbers. You don't want to knock off any whole numbers or you totally change the value of your problem. Because think about this. You had 3,000 492. Imagine that's like, I don't know, points that you have in a video game or money in your pocket, and all of a sudden you round it and you're down to 35. Does that make sense? No. So make sure that you're paying attention to those zeros. Okay, so the next part we're going to do is rounding decimals. So go ahead and write this title in the next available spot on your page. So let's go ahead and start with the number 16 and 592 thousandths. I want you to round this number to the nearest tenth. So now the tenth, keep in mind I have that THS or TH at the end of it. So that means I need a spot that's after the decimal point. The number that's in the tenth spot is the, can you guess? The 5. So let's draw our back door after the 5. So here's how this is a little different than some of the than the previous screen where you're rounding whole numbers. Now, the part that's still the same, let's talk about the same part first, sorry, is that you draw your back door. Let's figure out whether the 5, which is this guy right here, stays a 5 or if it goes up to the 6. So the way we figure that out is we look and see who's knocking. The 9 is knocking. So since he's 5 or more, we raise this guy right here. The 5 turns into a 6. So directly underneath it, I'm going to change my 5 into a 6. And everything in front of it stays the same, just like we did before on the previous screen. Any number that was in front of the spot that you rounded it to stays the same. Now here's the part that's different. All right, now because it comes after the decimal, we round it to a spot that was found after the decimal point. The 9 and the 2 get knocked out. We don't need to write about them at all. We don't need to turn them into zeros. Now if you do turn them into zeros, it doesn't change the value of your problem, but it does change the way the problem is read. So really, we just knock them out and don't worry about them at all. So 16.592, because I wanted you to round it to the nearest tenth, we went ahead. What that means is that I don't want any other numbers that come after the tenth spot. Now, this only applies to decimals. So therefore, we left it at 16.6. All right, let's try another problem. So let's try 179 and 924 thousandths. This one, I want you to round to the nearest. Let's start with the nearest hundredth, because we're going to round this number a couple different spots. So remember, the hundredth has a TH at the end of it, okay? So find your number that's in the hundredth spot. The number that's in your hundredth spot is the 2. So this is your hundredth spot number right there. So let's draw that back door after it. 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. Well, it's a 4. This guy's a 4. So we're going to let that guy rest, which means he stays the same. What also that means is this entire number inside or in front of the door stays exactly the way you see it. This guy at the end gets knocked down. So your answer for this problem is 179 and 92 hundredths. So going back to our original number, 179 and 924 thousandths, this time I want you guys to round it to the nearest tenth. Okay, tenth, TH at the end. So that means find your tenth spot. That would be the number that's in this position right over here. Draw your back door. There's my back door. Who's knocking on my back door? It's a 2. He's so little, he doesn't matter right now. So that means my 9 stays the same. So because I'm rounding to the decimal area, everything that I have in front of the spot that I wanted to round to stays exactly the same. So the 1, the 7, and the 9, the decimal point and the 9 stays the same. Now because the 24 is after my decimal, I don't need it. I don't need to turn it into zeros. I just drop it off. They're done with, gone, and just gone, done. Okay? And so try to think of it like that. So the last part is expressing money. Now you guys think about this. When you see dollar amounts or money amounts, price tags on things, the most common way to see it is you always have to have a dollar sign in the front of it, but it only has 2 numbers that come after the decimal point. just 2 numbers. So that means each of the numbers that you see on the screen are written not the way they should be. I can't have that last digit in each of those spots. Now, I can't just erase them and I can't just knock them off because you do have to round them. So you guys, this is something where you're going to come across in word problems. In our next unit of study, when we're doing ratios and unit rates, you're going to have to, on your own, when you're dealing or calculating with money amounts or dollar amounts, like how much something is, if you calculate something and your number ends up looking like one of these, you have to, on your own, know what to do with that extra digit. What we do with that extra digit is we drop it off, like we round it, okay? So let's look at our first one, $14, and then you've got 923 after it that comes after that. So we know that the way money looks is money should only have 2 numbers that come after the decimal point. This is what money should look like. So let's see who's knocking on my back door. It's the 3. So this 3 is knocking. Now remember, 5 or more is the only time that it really matters. 4 or less, letter S, that means that 3 gets knocked down. My answer is exactly what you see in the box with the dollar sign, of course. $14.92. Now let's go across. So this next one, $29.47, this is what it should look like, just like that. Okay, so because our money, we only need 2 spots to come after the decimal. So now the 8 is knocking. Since the 8 is 5 or more, that means the 7 has to turn into an 8. So I'm talking about this 7 right here. We got to make that guy an 8. Okay, so now my answer for this problem is $29.48. Next problem. $104 and all that extra change, okay? This is what it has to look like, what's in my box. Who's knocking? The 4. 4 or less, let it rest. Well, let's let it rest. We don't need that. So your answer on this one is $104.09. And then the last one, okay, remember what money needs to look like, no more than 2 spots after the decimal point. Who's knocking on my door? That is the lovely 7. Well, 5 or more raise a score. So that 7 means that this 8 has to become 1 number bigger. 1 number bigger than 8 is a 9. So your answer for this problem ends up being $97.99. Okay, you guys. I know this is a longer than usual video, but the original video is still posted along with a few, several actually reteach videos. And I know a lot of you have struggled with the concepts in this. This was worth a 10-point quiz, so I really want you to do well on it. So be sure to review this before you retake that test for those of you that need to. All right, that's it for now. Good quizzing.